Welcome, everyone, to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelard. This is Chingazos and Fire, episode number 9. Our guest today is Alex Nowrastah. He is the Director of Studies at the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank. He works, a lot of his work has been published on mainstream publications. He's been on TV on MSNBC, Fox, Bloomberg, and other shows. He also has a new book that came out late last year, "Wretched Refuse." It's about the political economy of the immigration. So we're happy to have him here, and thank you, Alex, for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Carlos. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was kind of telling you pre-show that the first time I had seen you was maybe it was 2017, I think, is when you did it, and you were on Tucker Carlson, and somehow it came to me, somehow you figure out information comes to you. The algorithms still kind of sometimes get you where you want to be, and I saw your interview, and I remember just like, man, this guy's talking some badass shit, and you held your ground, and Tucker's a smart vato, so he knows how to give it too, and I remember just like, and part of the show where like Chingazos and Fire is meant like that, it's meant to throw punches in the arena of ideas, and I remember that I was like, man, this guy's a cool guy, and I'd like to kind of see what else these guys are going on, and I looked into a lot of your stuff, and man, you had a lot of cool stuff going on, a lot of interviews that I saw. So I think it's kind of cool that now I'm getting to interview you. So here we are.
Well, thanks, man. I hope I can perform as well tonight as I did on Tucker that night.
Oh yeah, no.
All the stars aligned.
yeah, no. I'm no Tucker, man. So it should be easy, but it should be really, really easy. But so I like to say that half of my audience are like libertarian people that I reached out to say, hey, check out the show. And then the other half are all the primos, tios, all the primas, family, their friends, people that don't know a lot of libertarian views. But before we get into that, I think it'd be good if you can give a background into where you were born, where you came from, if you have an immigration story because you got into immigration, and kind of, and how your life went in a way where you're working at a think tank that talks about immigration, or that's your work,
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Los Angeles in California, and some of the suburbs around LA. And I'm not an immigrant. My parents aren't even immigrants. My father's family, my father's parents, my grandparents immigrated from Iran in the late 1940s and had my father and my uncle here. And then my mom is just like, like an American mutt, right? Like just a bunch of like Europeans from like France and Germany and Scotland and all these other places sort of all combined into one. So I'm just like this mutt of backgrounds. Like I have Muslim ancestors from my dad's side, Protestants and Jews from my mom's, and like it's just like a big mess, right? And so after in college or in high school, I figured out I was a libertarian, and went to school at George Mason on the East Coast in Virginia, which is known as having an econ department for economics that is fairly free market. And from there, I had this stupid idea that I wanted to become a lawyer, which is very stupid. Like, don't ever do it. And I had took the LSAT, which is the law school admissions test. And I had basically some months hanging around, and I thought, well, now's my opportunity to have fun before I enter the workforce. I'm going to go intern at a libertarian think tank. And I did that with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. And, one thing led to another. And they basically hired me to work. And I wanted to write on the issue of immigration because, for a couple of reasons. One, not many people were writing about this. This was like 2007, 2008. It just wasn't the big deal that it is today. I thought it was fascinating because it touches on every aspect of our society, right? Immigration touches like wages, economics, government finances, crime, culture, American history. And that's fascinating. So it's like impossible to get bored with. And then the other reason is it's like a very American topic, right? It really allows me to dig into American history and something that I think makes this country pretty special compared to other countries. So by being able to do all that, one thing has led to another, and here I am. It's really as simple as that, right? So I don't have like a harrowing story, right? My grandparents are immigrants, but like, a quarter of Americans have immigrants grandparents, right? So that's not special. They didn't have like a crazy story, nothing out of the ordinary, and that's just like the usual here in America. So I gotta say, it's really like a labor of like interest, of passion, and it's something where liberalizing immigration, letting in more immigrants, is like probably the easiest and simplest thing that the U.S. government can do to increase prosperity and human liberty for both Americans and for people around the world. So I'm just attracted to it for that reason too.
Yeah, fair enough. No, cool. So perfect. So what I'd like to do, because a lot of people, I'm going to try to ask the questions the way that, well, yeah. So I guess I'm asking them now because it's my show. This is awesome. Anyway, okay. So I like to have the history and the backbone to lay out the playing field over time. So an important date that always comes up that I've heard you say, it's 1875 prior, and then after that was where the federal government got involved. Can you kind of give brief, like, hey, this act and that act and this one, and kind of give, just to lay out the playing field, and then we'll kind of try to get into these sections here a little bit, if you don't mind, if you can kind of do that for us, please.
Yeah, so from 1790 to 1875, the U.S. had open borders. There were 0 federal restrictions on immigrants moving to the United States. Some state governments had some restrictions for people who were sick or who were criminals, and they would make them basically wait in a hospital for like a few weeks before they could enter, right? But that was basically all that existed. In the beginning in 1875, the U.S. government steadily put in place restrictions. So in 1875, they put in place restrictions to say, like, if you were a criminal, if you're insane, if you're a prostitute, you couldn't immigrate to the U.S. 1882, they banned all Chinese immigrants. Congress did. 1885, they banned all of those who were coming here like on a labor contract. So if you were hired overseas to do a job in the United States, you were basically banned from doing so. 1907, they banned all Japanese immigrants to the United States. 1917, they banned everybody else from Asia, from Africa, and anybody who was illiterate from coming to the United States. 1921 and 1924, they put in place laws that put in place the first big numerical restrictions on Europeans. Basically putting in place laws that disfavor Italians and Greeks and Eastern Europeans, that favor Germans and Irish and Northern Europeans and Northwestern Europeans. At this time, they also put in some rules that limited immigration from Mexico, Central and South America, and Canada at the same time. But those weren't necessarily limited by numbers. They were more limited by other rules. But they put in place rules at that time. And so from basically 1924 to to the mid to late 1960s, the U.S. government had basically closed borders. We had a few guest worker visa programs, specifically for Mexicans that come up temporarily to work for a little bit, go back home. We got rid of some of the racial portions of the system in 1952, but it really wasn't until 1968 when the Immigration Act of 1965 went into effect. It went into effect in 1968. Where really they got rid of like these per country origin numbers, where they said, okay, if you're from all these different countries, we're not really going to put a racial or quota based on where you come from in that regard. There's other limitations, right? But there's no limitation on where you come from. And then in 1990, in 1986, they had an amnesty for the roughly 2 to 3 million mostly Mexican illegal immigrants who were here. They would got on a path to a green card and citizenship if they wanted to. In 1990, they expanded legal immigration again, primarily for high-skilled workers. So it mainly increased it for like Indians and East Asians, Chinese workers, etc. And then beginning in 1996 to today, it's just been a steady drumbeat of basically increasing restrictions. More enforcement, more border patrol, more penalties if you break immigration law, longer jail terms, more deportations, e-verify, employment checks, all this other stuff. So since like the mid 1990s, we've had basically no liberalizations through law. So President Obama did a little thing through an executive action called DACA, allowing illegal immigrants who are brought here as children to get a temporary work permit. That's like in legal. I mean, it's basically being targeted all the time under the law. Its legality is suspect. It's they can't get citizenship on that if you're a DACA recipient. That's probably the best thing that's happened to immigration since the early 1990s.
Do you think, and I just thought of this, do you think that in the 90s, when the crime bill came in and that complex would have, lobbied for a crime bill, which is like the prison, I wouldn't say military, but maybe a little bit of the light military. And once they lobbied for that bill and got enough money to start lobbying for more, then they kind of like, hey, let's start making putting more restrictions on and have, I don't know. I'm just asking the question, is there any parallel to that or was it different complex? Like, what are the complexes at play that lobby for these types of laws? Or is it just fear mongering from politicians to try to win votes?
So it's, there's always like some people who benefit from any law, right? That's why any law becomes law, because somebody benefits, right? And like some of these, private prisons and of course the government unions, the Border Patrol Union, the ICE Union, police unions, prison unions. There's some big lobbyists for these laws. But in the mid 1990s, you also had this big increase in opposition to illegal immigration, to immigration in general from Americans. You see it in the Gallup survey poll. Like in the mid 90s, 2/3 of Americans wanted to cut immigration numbers, like wanted to reduce it. And that was the high watermark for sort of like nativism. And they tried to. Some Republicans and Democrats in Congress tried to cut legal immigration, but their efforts just barely failed to do that. And so what I think you really saw was basically public opinion turning against immigration. And I think partly because of what was going on along the border, right? You have like large numbers of people entering unlawfully. I think when most people see something that's like chaotic, they generally turn against that thing. Even if it's like a victimless offense or a victimless crime, they turn against it. And I think, that was during a time of a fairly large surge of unauthorized, unlawful, illegal immigration across the border. So I think that's probably what was going on, right? In the same way that people were worried about crime in other areas, they were worried about this sort of like unlawful chaos. And there's a lot of like research in what's called political psychology that looks at this. So when people like in Australia, which until COVID-19 had a very open immigration system, there used to be refugees that landed on their shores from like Myanmar or Burma or like Afghanistan. And whenever that would happen, Australians would be really against immigration because it was chaotic. But then when the Australian government started stopping these boats in the water using the Navy and putting them on an island for processing, support for immigration shot up, right? Because they got it under control. So that's like the catch-22 of the immigration debate. The more under control it is, the more people want to liberalize immigration. But the more chaotic it is, the more they want to crack down. And the more they crack down, the more chaotic it gets. And it's this like really bad cycle where what we really need to do is liberalize and open up. And that will solve the chaos. And that will make it sustainable. But it's just like hard to get, right? Like how do you convince people when there's chaos that the government needs to do less? That's like a challenge.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Something that I wanted to kind of put out there for the purposes of when we get into this, we're going to use this word here moving forward. But I had not heard of this term, but I doing my research for the interview was a pre-assimilation, and I had never even I was like, oh yeah, oh shit, that's right, like pop culture, and I said even maybe the wars that are overseas, foreign interventions probably, they start learning. Anyway, can you kind of talk about pre-assimilation and then and then kind of blend into assimilation, which is the beef that I feel a lot of people have, is that they don't know that it happens, but it happens over some time and stuff like that. So can you kind of go from pre-assimilation to assimilation, and then we'll use the word here as we kind of move forward here.
Yeah, definitely. So pre-assimilation is the idea that before an immigrant comes here, he or she becomes familiar with American culture in some ways, right? Like, so they may, learn some English words, learn a little bit of English, are familiar with American culture through movies, through music, through television shows, maybe by talking with like their American family members, like on the phone or on Skype or Zoom. On Skype, man, that dated me. Or like Zoom, right? Like on Zoom, right? Or on the phone, reading American books, things like this, right? Like my I have we have a research associate at Cato right now who I work with, who's Mexican. He's from northern Mexico, and northern Mexico is like really this blend of like American and Mexican culture in terms of like just like the Texas American border on the Texas side, right? Like this is the blend.
El Norte.
Like,
yeah, that's
like
where that's El Norte, right? That's basically where I live in San Antonio, so it's basically like northern Mexico, if you depending on how you look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, and like the norteños, right, are like this like cowboy culture of like individualists who like to start businesses and be cowboys, and it's like, well, that sounds pretty American, and like they like the same, they like similar music, barbecue is popular on both sides of the border, Tex-Mex. I mean, this food's similar, right? Like it's just similar. So somebody coming from like Monterrey, Mexico, to like San Antonio, right? Like that's a much smaller move in a lot of ways because of pre-assimilation than like an Irish person moving from like Ireland to New York in like 1850. And so it's just like a much easier thing. So as a result of that, you get sort of just like faster rates of further assimilation and integration into American culture. And one of the most important findings is by this economist named Jake Victor. And what he found is like, it's tough to measure something like assimilation. Like what does that even mean to be like culturally American, right? So we took a look at some measurable characteristics like how old are you when you get married? How do you attend religious services? Do you vote? What's your income? What's your education? All these different things that we actually know. And it turns out that depending on the immigrant group, but it's basically 2 to 3 generations between those people's kids, grandkids, the first generation of the immigrants, the second generation are their American-born kids, the third are their grandkids, right? And basically it's like 2 to 3 generations before they're basically identical to other Americans who have been here for a longer period of time. Now, for some groups, it's a little slower in some ways. For some groups, it's a little faster in other ways. So one of the things we know, like from Southern California, like the descendants of Hispanic immigrants typically hold on to some Spanish for about 3 generations. But by the 3rd or the 4th, it basically fades away. It's basically gone. Other people from other countries, the language basically fades away very rapidly. And it really like just depends on the number of other speakers here and how useful the language is in the United States. So what's fascinating is like in American history, there are times where there were millions of people here who spoke Hungarian and who spoke Polish and who spoke German. And there's basically no one alive today who's born in the United States, who's alive now, who speaks these languages as like a first language. I mean, very, very few. And they're almost all elderly people. And so it's one of these things where it's just like the natural process. So like my grandparents on my father's side, their first language was Farsi, Persian. And then when they came here, my father learned to speak a little bit, but he speaks it like he's a 4 or 5-year-old, right? Like with a thick Wisconsin accent. It's hilarious. He's like this tall, dark, swarthy guy who's like Oshkosh, Oshkosh, don't you know, eh? And it's just like he fully assimilated, right? And I don't speak any. Like I took German in high school, right? Like I speak more German than I do like Farsi. And that's just like the way that it normally goes in this country.
You still know the bad words though, right?
No, I don't even know those, man.
Oh, you don't even know those?
I don't even know those. I know the words for like different types of food, right?
Oh, okay, yeah, the food. Okay, because like in Mexico, like so, yes, you're right. My I'm a son of immigrants. Then my daughter, yeah, like I'll teach her. I'm I do some Spanish, but not really. And I can already tell that by the time she's not going to know Spanish like I did. And then I also talk it Tex-Mex, not like so yeah, that's just 3 generations. So my daughter, yeah, she's not going to speak Spanish, but she's going to know the bad words probably because we still talk them like that. But
well, I know the bad word. I know the bad words in Spanish, man.
So you even know those, right? Those are the good ones.
Yeah, but like there's this writer in LA who I really like named Gustavo Arellano. He used to have this column, Ask a Mexican, which was like hilarious, right? And he had this story about how his folks were illegal immigrants who were farm workers. And they really, really wanted Gustavo to know Spanish. And he said, so I speak it okay. And then he's like, and I really, really want my kids to learn Spanish, which means they won't know anything. And he's like, it's like Polish immigrants. Like being Polish used to be a really big deal, right? Like my mom grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And there was like these stereotypes about Polish people. Like, you've heard these jokes, right? Like, oh, Polish people are dumb because of, something ridiculous, right? And people used to like get in fights over this stuff, like beat each other up and like knife each other, right? And now, yeah, like, right? But now it's like, who cares? Like, we say these jokes because they're so stupid, because we can't imagine that people will be mad at each other over being Irish or Polish. And in a few generations, right, I think it's going to be the same for some of these other descendants of Americans from other ethnicities, right? Like, to be Mexican will be like, oh, yeah, whatever. Like, in the same way that being Polish used to be like a really big deal. In the future, it's going to be like, meh. And that's just seems to be the way that it happens, right? Like, that seems to be, no value judgment. I think it's probably a good thing, right? Like, people feel like this is their home and they feel like, they're not attached to other places as much. And that's probably a good thing. But like, it's just hilarious. And it's so funny. And every story from every person from every different country is like the exact same. Like the Irish and the Italians and the Jews and the Chinese and the Polish and the Hungarians. And it's like, it's going to be the same thing with the Mexicans and be the same thing with Chinese and be the same thing with Vietnamese and Indians and Africans and whatever other group like comes in the future.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Being a libertarian and all that, the way the economies work and markets work, but the smallest little mini markets are your family. And I just really don't talk Spanish too much to my daughter because it's easier just to start talking English already. So even within that market, I value the time. I don't have the time to really talk. So you can even scale that up and just be like, hey, scale that up to, big cultures and society. That's why it happens, because people have to work. People, you don't have the time to, and if you do, then that's good, but a lot of people don't. So you could just see how that plays out. One of the measurements that I've heard you say, and this is cool because it's perfect, is the names of children. How do they measure that? Because I have some primos that are here legally, but they have their kids and all that, and they named one of their kids, and they were like, oh, well, what's the name gonna be? Jonathan. It's like, Jonathan, because this so Jonathan. I don't know. I was like, okay, well, but then I didn't talk shit like how we would normally talk shit, like, because this is a white. Because I kind of step back and be like, you know what, I know without even asking, I already know what they're doing. They're already trying to assimilate because they're not here legally. They already want to get, so it happens, I don't think anybody told them to do it, that they just, hey, let's name our kid Jonathan, so, but yeah. It's real, And
no, it's totally real, right? So this research, Leah Bustan, who is she's an economic historian at Princeton, and this guy Ran Abramatsky, who is a economic historian at Stanford. So what they did was they basically loaded up all the old census data, which is done every 10 years, all the old names from like the 19th and 20th, early 20th century. And then they track like the first names for the kids and households for people who are foreign born. And they sort of make a list of like what they considered to be like the most common American names for like firstborn. So some of it's like guessing, right? Like, it would be like, okay, the name Matthew, that's probably like an American name. But the name, like, say, Cacciatore, for like, that's like an Italian name, like, right? Or like, or Moshi like, you know, Moses, right? For like an Eastern European immigrant. Like, okay, those are probably like foreign names, right? So they code it that way. And then they count to see like how long it takes for, you know, immigrants and their kids or descendants to basically name their kids basically these like much more common American names. And what happens, what's interesting is like some foreign names, foreign origin names, like do catch on and become like American names. So some stuff like Vincent has become, it was more like sort of like South you know, southern like European name. It sort of became like a name that can be used. Like anybody can name their kid Vincent. It won't be like weird, right? But if I name my kid, like if I name my kid, like I don't have any Hispanic ancestry, my wife doesn't. But if I name my kid Carlos, that would be kind of, you know, that'd be kind of weird, right? Like you might be flattered, but it'd be weird.
Yeah, no, I hear you. That's funny. That's funny.
It's
but,
like it was that joke in that movie, The Hangover, right? Where they had that little white baby that they took, and they're like, "Oh, baby Carlos," and I was like, "What's going on here?" So
and
that's like pretty. It's pretty funny, like right. And I think what, you know, some of your buddies, right, who are, you know, illegal immigrants who name their kids like Jonathan, they're doing them a favor in a way, because my wife's dad is an immigrant, and he, you know, wanted to name his kids a name from his culture. And so he picked a name that is basically unpronounceable to everybody, and everybody gets wrong. Everybody assumes she's a man. Everybody misspells it. And she's like, gosh darn it. Like, why? Like, why did you do that? And now he like regrets it. He's like, yeah, you know, I should have given you a name that at least people can know, like, and say easily.
yeah, the names thing, it's not unique to America, because my mom, she was born like in the Guadalajara region, but still not in the city. So, you know, they consider themselves like in the ranch or monte, you know. But back then, you know, depending on what day you were born, they would tie it to like the, I don't know, somehow you would get your name from the day you were born. And her name was Tecla. But when she went to go get her papers, like her in the city, they decided to change it to Teresa. So even then my daughter's name is Zenobia, which is my grandma's name. But I wanted to be I want one of those old school. And my grandma's name Zenobia is that is the Monte name from whatever day she was born. But it even happens over there where, hey, they're born in the ranch and all that, and when you move to closer to the city and you get your birth certificate, they change it to sound a little bit, you know, it's, you know, whatever, you know, there's a difference between Tecla and Teresa, you know, but they even do it in Mexico, you know, so it happens all the time where they do these things.
That's a beautiful name. That's a beautiful name, by the way. Zenobia.
Yeah, no, I like it, man. It's we like it, and we just call her Senny.
That's great.
Simple.
Like that's an easy name, right? Like it's like my wife's name is La Dan.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Like that's a burden.
And that's funny because when we do these names, our parents, so this is the I don't even know what you call this, but this was the pushback. So when we were telling them about these names, they're like, no, don't use those names. When we were kids, anybody had those names, we would make fun of them in school. So they would say, no, you know, when kids have these weird, you know, and my dad's funny because he remembers all these weird, like they're funny Mexican names. Like I can't even think right now, but they're real names, you know, but they just sound like real, like old school Mexican. And no, we make fun of those people, but we wanted to still kind of, no, but we don't care. They're not gonna, you know, here it's gonna sound cool, but you know, but there's these weird tensions that the names, you know, have a lot of, I don't know, I guess you put whatever you put into the name of, I don't know, the potential value of the name, you know, being important in the, you know, whatever it is, but yeah, it's kind of unique. So can you so then what happened? So then that sounds like a lot of work that these people did. They looked up all the names, and I mean, that sounds like a lot of shit to do.
Oh man, it's thank God for computers, right? Like you couldn't do it without computers. So there are, you know, hundreds of millions of data points. And so you design this program using basically machine learning techniques, which is basically like telling a computer to look for patterns and telling it to identify these patterns based on some parameters that you give it. So you give these parameters like identify these names, how long does it take? And what they basically find is like it's pretty quick. It's like 2 to 3 generations. They basically fully have these sort of much more American names, but there are some weird exceptions. And so one of the things that's like really interesting is around World War One, when the U.S. was fighting Germany, there was just like this incredible anti-German backlash where they used to teach like German in American schools. Like it used to be like some schools used to be all in German if you wanted them to be for your kid. So it's like in the early 20th century. And there were some places where they not only like ended that and just did straight up just English, but they made it illegal to teach German, even as a second language, and illegal to speak it in public, illegal to have German newspapers, all these things. And so all these German Americans were like, well, this is the culture that I want to pass on to my kids. So some of them were just like, well, we don't care that much. So whatever, our kids learn English. Others were like, no, we really want to hold on to this German culture. And so what they did was they sort of like kept their kids out of school. They did more homeschooling. They taught them like German secretly or sent them to like illegal clubs to learn German, named their kids more German names, went to only like German language church services, and did all these things to like just increase like the German cultural production in their households and families and communities. The result being that the people who were most affected by this when World War II came around, we were fighting the Germans again, much less likely to sign up for the military to fight the Germans. So it was this thing where they're like, we need to crush these Germans to make sure they assimilate and become Americans. And it kind of backfired. And it slowed it down by like a generation or two. And it's funny because like my mom's family, a lot of them were German, living in this part of the country where you could take like German in your school at the time. And they were kind of mixed in the backlash. Like some of my ancestors were just like kind of like, whatever, I'll just learn English. And others were like really upset about it and had like a chip on their shoulder. So there were some words that I learned from my mom. I didn't know like the English equivalent until I was older. Yeah. Like I thought when you sneezed, instead of saying like somebody sneezed, you're supposed to say like bless you. I thought it was Gesundheit. I thought it was that until I was like 12. That was the only way that you were supposed to say that because that's the German way of saying it.
Oh, it is? Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah, it's like Gesundheit. And like that's like my default, right? But everyone else says bless you. So they see me and they're like, what's up with this dark looking guy saying like this German word when somebody sneezes? That's weird.
Yeah, no, that's funny. That one of the grievances that the state of Texas had against Mexico was that Mexico was trying to do Spanish only like schooling and things like that. And, I always trip out when people like, some people will say, oh, speak, here in Texas, speak English, this is Texas, this is America. And without even like thinking like the first European language here was Spanish, and they don't even, but yeah, so the people try to hold on to their culture as much as you can, but also when you're a creature of going out into the market, you're also going to do what you got to do to, make money to feed your family.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this research by this professor at Dartmouth, and he takes a look at the benefit of speaking English in the United States. And he basically says for like a high school dropout who's a worker, speaking English gets you about a 20% pay raise. And that's like a lot. That's a lot of money, right? Like your buddies who came here illegally who are working, right? Like it sucks to be illegally in the United States. They're away from some of their family. That sucks. You damn right they're going to try to maximize their income. Like who wants to be away from their family and, not do that? So yeah, they're going to learn it.
Visit PalomaVerdeCBD.com for all of your CBD needs and use the promo code Chingasos for 25% off your order and to support this show. Now, let's get back to it.
On these questions of assimilation, they have a long lineage because they would have asked them a long time ago. Is there room, or is there new questions that are being posed now that are starting to give new data points that Like, is there room for new questions? Do they always have to be the ones that I know that they're better because over time you get to see these trends, but is there new questions that are being asked, or is it just the same ones?
So you're right? Like the same ones are probably the most valuable because you can just like compare over time. And so what's funny when you do that is like the rate of Mexicans and Mexican Americans assimilating in the US is like identical to that of Italians. It's like by generation, like identical relative to native born Americans, right? So it's like really cool to see that over time on these questions and income and education and everything. But the new questions that are being asked, people are asking questions about like patriotism, for instance, which is like really a hard thing to measure. Right? Like I can't just be like, how much do you love America? Right? Like on a scale of like all American Eagles are awesome to George Washington is the best. Like how are you going to even answer that question? Right? And would you even believe the answers? So they ask questions like, is America the best country in the world? Should other countries be more like the United States? They ask questions like this to try to get at sort of your underlying patriotism. And the general like finding is that immigrants are a little bit more likely to say that America is the best country in the world. And they're like a little bit more likely to say that other countries should be like it. Not by a whole lot, but by a little bit. And if those are the best measures of patriotism we have, I think it's fairly safe to say that the immigrants are basically more patriotic, or at least as patriotic, as native-born Americans are. And that's pretty cool, right? Like I consider myself to be patriotic, right? But I'm not like a big, nationalist or patriot or anything like that. I'm not going to run around in the streets with like American flag clothes on 24/7 and all that, right? Like I do love the United States. I think it's a great place, but I'm not going to like be a super patriot, right? But it is like pretty cool to see people who come here from abroad and really like it right off the bat because you and I, man, we're born here, and this is basically the place that we know best, and so we see all the problems and we focus on the problems. I think that's human nature, right? But if you come from overseas and you come from a place that has more problems to here, it's easier to focus on the good. So, like, my grandfather growing up, right, I complain about America and all this other stuff. And he's like, yeah, well, it's better than Iran. And I'm like, you know what, Grandpa? That's a good point. That's a good point, old man. You're right.
Yeah, it's all about the perspective and how they grew up. So yeah, I mean, we're spoiled, right? We're very spoiled compared to the previous generations and all that. And
it's like I don't believe in like this white privilege stuff that people talk about, right? But I do believe in American privilege. Being here is like quite the privilege, and being here legally, right, to be a citizen, is like quite the privilege, and that's something that I think we lose sight of sometimes as spoiled Americans.
Yeah, no, that's cool that you brought up that you don't believe in white privilege. Yeah, me either. I kind of feel that I'm privileged because I'm lucky and blessed enough to have good parents. I mean, having good parents probably is more important than this, your color of your skin or whatever. But talking up when we did the original timeline, there was acts that were, that had to do with race and things like that. Do these acts cut on racial? Is it always racial, or is it that it's mostly like native versus foreign? Or I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm asking the question. I mean, how do they pan out? Is it, hey, we know that this? I mean, I don't even know if they know this. That if whether this group from this country votes more this way or that way. These are the arguments that are made. I don't even know if they're true. Sometimes they're just things that are said. How does that play out?
So from like 1882, when the Chinese Exclusion Act became law, until 1968, the immigration law was like very racist and was very much intended to be. So, we have the Chinese Exclusion Act. That's obvious what they were trying to do. The anti-Japanese stuff is like obvious. The anti-African and Asian stuff, like obvious, right? And then the laws to focus on excluding Italians and Eastern Europeans and Jews, like obvious. And then they start to slowly peel those back in some ways. Nowadays, the rules are not like biased in that way. They're sort of intended not to be, but they have. I don't think it's fair to call the current system racist intentionally. It does have some unintentional features, though, that basically prejudice it against people from big countries. So if you come from like India or China or the Philippines or Mexico or another like big country that sends a lot of people here, it is harder. And that's just harder because there are these quotas or caps in the law that say like no more than 7% of green cards in a lot of these categories can come from any one country. So that means if you're from like, the Central African Republic, or if you're from Iceland, or if you're from like, I don't know, some small country like Turkmenistan, right? It's a lot easier to come here, all things being equal, than if you are an immigrant from like India on a high skilled visa, because the wait time to get a green card is over a century because the backlog is so high. And that's just, I don't think that they wrote the law to target like Indian immigrants, right? Or high skilled immigrants. I think it's just an accident of a really stupid system that is really poorly designed, that is basically like an example of like soft socialism, right? It's like the government trying to plan the flows of labor internationally in a complicated market, coming up with rules that backfire and produce incredible disparities of outcomes and wait times and everything else. And in a way, what's funny is the way that the 1965 Act, which basically made it not explicitly racist anymore, it accidentally, by dumb accident, basically favors people from Latin America. And that was like not intentional, right? Like in the mid 60s, people were like, not like, we need more Mexicans in America. No, that was not what they were saying at the time. But that's the way it worked out, because it was the unintended consequence of these laws, was that it basically made it a lot easier for people from Central and South America to come, and Mexico to come to the United States. And I think that's to America's benefit. I think it's great that happened. But man, they did not intend that. That was by total accident.
And when you say the backlog, I think I've heard you say like 4 million visa, or the backlog is how much? Like it's big, right?
So it depends on the category. So
Okay.
Immigration law, green cards are in different categories.
Okay.
There are some for family-based green cards, and there are some for like employment-based for high-skilled workers. So the high-skilled workers one is over 1 million backlog. And then the one for like family members, about 4 million.
Okay. So being like, an advocate for smaller government, when I hear you say those numbers, to me, it kind of feels like someone in DC starts thinking like, hey, we don't need to serve the system of immigration to make it easier, or to make it seems like they're ready to serve the bureaucratic class that has to do all the work of, when you hear that many backlog, you're like, hey, we got work for chingles of years, and who does that work? The people that live in wherever they have to process all that stuff, I guess, and all the people that work connected to, is there a budget? Like, what do they fall under the immigration? Because funny story, man, I live I have an immigration lawyer as a neighbor, and then I have a retired border patrol. I lived in between next to two, but they're all right. They're cool, man. Everybody's cool. We all hang out and drink and hang out. But the lawyers, they I told them I was gonna talk to you, and this is their kind of question. They wanted to kind of, but they had said, and I didn't know this, but when I talked to them, I always ask questions because I'm always trying to learn stuff. But they're like, yeah, a lot of this stuff where we go, they're courts, but they're not like judicial courts. They're like administrative courts, and depending on who's in power and whatever, I don't know, sets of rules that come from the top, or that's how we have to adjust to whoever. So it I don't know. I guess the question is it I don't know, it's fucked up, right? That it's like that, right? I mean,
Yeah,
basically,
no, it's terrible, right? And the courts is not, the courts is not the worst problem, right? The worst problem is there's a backlog because Congress says you can only process 140,000 employment-based green cards a year, and you can only process for the green card categories that we're talking about for families 226,000 a year, and that's it. So anybody can enter the line, but they're only letting in that many every year for no. I mean, that's just the numbers they picked that Congress picked. So this is Congress's creation. And then in the meantime, if you have a problem, like God help you, because the immigration law is almost as complicated as the income tax, and how complicated it is and how messed up it is. And if you have to go to court, like your neighbor said, right, it's not like a real court. It's an administrative court. You don't have court-appointed attorneys. It's like going in front of a court where most of the judges are former prosecutors, where most of the people who are hearing these cases, there's no review of what they do. They just say, like, okay, you got to go. You're deported. And that's that. And frankly, the law says that most of the time, too. So it's like really bad law on top of a really bad due process system that's basically isn't due process. And the combination is just like Soviet-style judicial system on top of a central planning bureau. And it's a disaster. Like, it's just a disaster. There are very few areas of American law that are as messed up and as screwed up and as, frankly, like the Anglo-Saxon system of jurisprudence that you can possibly find as immigration law. It's like a piece of Soviet-era communist law got, like, parachuted into the American legal system.
Man, yeah, that sounds horrible. But when you said the tax law, we know that it's a code and that the CPA lawyer lobbies, I guess you want to call them, they like that because they're the ones that can read the code, right? I mean, they put it out there in front of you like, hey, you can do this too, but you got to learn this code, and you got to go to school and you got to do that. And you got to, who's lobbying for this type of administrative, I don't know, like, is it just that the system just builds on itself bad and it just keeps building on itself bad? And as long as these people I'm saying people like the bureaucratic class still has the jobs, they don't matter, or is there people that are like lobbying for is there lobbying for this type of, I don't know, chaos?
It's mostly what you said about it, just like layering laws over time. Like everything else, right? Like, I think it's in computer science. It's the term called a kludge, which is when you have like a computer code.
I never heard
where
that.
It's like, yeah, it's all like clogged up. It's like got a bunch of crap in there. It runs really slow. And instead of fixing the code, you just add more crap to like work around it. And it makes it slow, makes sure it doesn't work. And that's what I think we have in every part of American law, right? Every part of American law is like this. But immigration law is one of the worst. I mean, there's stuff in there from like the 19th century that just like doesn't make any sense. There's stuff in there about how you have to answer questions if you're a Nazi war criminal. It's like, what? Like, I was born in 1983. If I were immigrating here, how could I be like a Nazi war criminal, right? Like, I was born 38 years after the war ended. Like, what could I possibly? No, it doesn't matter. You have to answer that question, and you have to provide all these documents. It's ridiculous. Like, there's no reason.
Yeah,
for most of these laws.
And a good example is that I've heard you say that just the Trump administration put like over 400 executive actions and on the, like, what does that even mean? Like, so, I mean, I heard you say it, but what does that mean? What does that mean?
So some of these actions would do things like add more, like make immigration forms longer by requiring new information. They would some of them would give, say, like immigration agents the power to ask additional questions, like more and more questions about, say, your income, to make sure that you can support yourself, but ask like really detailed questions about things that are hard to prove. They would do things like one of the executive orders was the one that banned some immigrants from some Muslim countries that he put in place right away. Other ones basically said, like, if you're asking for asylum, you have to wait in Mexico rather than waiting in the United States. They said things like anybody who comes up in a court, asylum court, for this or that, like if they have this type of claim, then they're basically automatically guilty. And then executive orders saying, like, local police, if you get federal government money, you basically have to enforce federal immigration law and things like that. So, I mean, those are just like some examples, right? But he did it like hundreds of times. And because the law is so complicated, a couple small changes here or there can make a big difference if you add them all up. I mean, the biggest executive order he did was in April of 2020, where he basically said all embassies overseas are going to stop processing green cards applications and stop processing visas for any kind of visa to come to the United States. And he did this, during the coronavirus pandemic to save jobs. He said, we're doing it to save jobs. He didn't say we're doing it to protect, public health or whatever. He said we're doing it to save jobs. And that, with those executive orders, he did more to stop legal immigration to the United States in a faster period of time than any president has in American history. It was from his perspective, right, from Trump's perspective and from Stephen Miller's perspective, it was the most successful series of executive orders ever published by an American president. Yeah. Awful for our country, right? Devastating. But from their perspective, like they basically won.
So if Trump can do these executive actions, then Biden can, take them away or write ones that, overcome these, how is he doing moving forward here?
So he repealed those really bad ones that I mentioned.
Okay.
The problem is because immigration is so complicated, there's all these steps to get a green card, right? Like you have to get sponsored, and you have to go to your interview at your embassy, and then you have to get your visa, and then you have to go to the border to get your visa inspected again, and then you have to come into the country. What happens is because they stopped the processing of visas overseas, the State Department basically fired all these bureaucrats whose job it is to process the visas. So now that they started up the processing again, all these people whose job it was to do it are fired. But the American law requires them to be processed in this way, where you have a bunch of bureaucrats stamping a bunch of papers, right? So without that, it's actually pretty hard to get it started. So Biden has restarted it. It is building and going back up, but it's going to be a couple years before they get it back to what it was. Just because the system is so complicated and so messed up to begin with. So Biden is sort of slowly going through and getting rid of tons of executive orders that President Trump did, doing it sort of very, consistently and confidently, but he's moving at a steady pace, right? So it's not fast. And they are contemplating and doing some things to expand legal immigration, but they're not really there yet.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So, I brought up Trump and Biden, and it sounds like that, at least on this immigration stuff, because the way it's set up, that it does matter a lot who wins the presidency because of these executive actions for this type of stuff. But and I want to be respectful of your time, so I got to move here a little bit to what is your vision of how the big vision, but also how you would, I don't know, I guess even start taking away these layers of all of this. What was the word you used? The kludge?
Kludge, yeah.
I mean, or are you guys there at Cato trying to just put the ideas out, which is put these ideas out that there's different ways of looking at this, and then hope that I don't know how you said, the culture kind of changes towards, I guess, we're getting here towards the end, and I kind of want to get you on that end, but I have a lot of questions. We got to talk again, but can you kind of get into that a little bit?
So we do everything. right? My colleague David Beer and I, and we have a research associate, Mike Howard. We do original research to prove our point. So I do research on like immigration and crime. We put out like ideas, right? Like new ideas to expand legal immigration, to legalize people. And then we meet with people in Congress. We meet with people in the administration. We pitch our ideas, and we go, we get in the nuts and bolts with these people to convince them. And then we try to convince like other stakeholders and other sort of lobbyists and other, think tankers and other sort of writers in DC to go along with it, right? So we do all that. I mean, my end goal is that if America should have immigration system whereby people who are not criminals, not national security threats, and who don't have serious communicable diseases should be able to come here and live and work and eventually to become citizens. So I think with those three exceptions, right, like people should be able to come here and work and live and eventually become American citizens like you and me. Now, that's a pretty big difference from the current system, right? This is like if you and I were like in the Soviet Union in 1985, right, and saying we want to be like Hong Kong, right? That's like the difference between here, right? So it's a long road to hoe. It's just a long place. It's a far off destination. So what we're doing is we're working, within the current system, right? Like how can you interpret some rules currently to get, 140,000 more green cards? What small laws can you pass to sort of repeal some of these restrictions that will allow in, more legal immigrants? How can we allow more low-skilled workers, temporary visas, right, to come and work for like 10 months or a year and then go back home if they want to? Like, how do we liberalize all of these things? Hopefully a lot, but if not a lot, at least a little bit, so that we can have a little bit freer system. And that is, it can be frustrating at times, right? I've been working on this since like 2007, and we haven't had that many successes, like to be blunt about it, right? But we have stopped some bad things. And that's the other way that you measure our success, is the things that we've been able to stop and to slow down. But yeah, that's my libertarian ideal, right? And we're moving toward it. We're trying. And we're pushing hard, and we've got a team of people who are just dedicated to going all the way. Yeah,
no, you definitely are throwing chingazos, punching up for sure, but knowing that you're going against some big heavyweights, yes, they're.
Well, man, we all are, man. We're libertarians, right? Like we're an intellectual minority, and we've got our work cut out for us.
No, for sure. I hear you. Yeah. So, man, I have a lot more questions, and the time went by so fast that I hope that I can try to get you back on, because I'd like to play like devil's advocate and kind of push back on the normal, because even in libertarian circles, the open borders discussion is something that's very, we have our own debates on it, but so it'd be interesting to get your takes on that. And I thank you for coming on, and I hope I can get you back on. And can you please plug in where people can reach you, get information about how they can support y'all's effort at Cato, or whatever, whatever you want to plug in, please.
Thanks a lot. I hope to come back someday soon. So yeah, you can reach me. You can look online. Our website is cato.org. That's CATO.org. And you can follow me on Twitter. At Alex Nowrastah. So you can follow me there. I tweet a lot. And my colleague, David J. Beer, is also at Cato. So follow us, follow our work. That's the best places. Those are the best places to go to see us.
All right. Fair enough. Yeah, no, thank you again. And hopefully we can do it again.
Thanks, man. See you later, Carlos.
Peace later.